joining everyone virtually this year for Prepare AI. I'm really excited to be here with Kelly Wibbenmeyer. My name is Paul Boal, and we're going to be talking about automation and AI in the healthcare space. We think this is really important. Healthcare has been in some ways a late adopter to automation and artificial intelligence. There are some other industries doing things in a way that's probably a few years ahead of what we're doing in healthcare. But in healthcare, it's amazing what a huge impact we can have. And I love this quote from Dr. Topol about how automation is going to help us bring the care back into healthcare. And that's what Kelly and I are here to talk about today, to help healthcare organizations understand what the opportunities are and just how impactful they can be. So let's start with a quick introduction. My name is Paul Boal. I'm Vice President of Innovation at Amitech Solutions, a healthcare data analytics and automation firm here in St. Louis. And Kelly, you want to give a quick introduction?
Sure, absolutely. Hello, my name is Dr. Kelly Wibbenmeyer. I'm the Director of Performance Consulting and Business Solutions at Mercy in St. Louis. I have two areas of key responsibility. I'm over the automation team, and I'm also managing the supply chain management systems at Mercy as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So let's jump right in. For those of you who are already familiar with how healthcare really works behind the scenes, there are a lot of points here that you probably know. But for those of you who don't, this could be very informative. In healthcare, we've got a few challenges happening in the industry right now. One is that the demand for healthcare workers is outpacing the rate at which they're being trained and graduating with certifications and qualifications. An especially big problem as our population continues to age. The healthcare workers that we do have are spending a lot more time on documentations than they are face-to-face with patients. And we'll talk about some of the statistics on that here in just a minute. But obviously that's a big challenge. We want healthcare workers to be providing care as much as possible. And the cost of healthcare labor as a total portion of what healthcare is spending, what it costs to run healthcare, especially here in the United States, just continues to climb. And this is an unsustainable problem. It's one we've seen coming for a long time. It's been true for a long time. And we have yet to really be able to curb those expenses. So those are big challenges, and the technologies that we have now with robotic process automation and artificial intelligence and machine learning, they give us the ability to solve a lot of these things. But in healthcare, nothing ever really comes easy. None of this is an easy problem to solve. This takes work, and it takes really thoughtful planning. It takes intentionality, and that's what Kelly and I are here really to focus on today, is what are the intentional things that anybody looking to do automation or artificial intelligence in healthcare, to do things that really make a difference for their organizations, what are some of the things you really need to be thinking about? So we're going to talk first in this session about what is the impact, what is the potential impact of robotic process automation and artificial intelligence on the workforce in healthcare? What are all of those things that we can do that are going to have an impact, and why is this so important? And then Kelly's going to talk about her experience and what it takes to really build up the potential, build up the success of automation and AI within a healthcare organization. Things like managing relationships. How do you help people understand where ideas come from, and the intake and governance and all of the work that it takes to make sure that you're actually creating value through your automation program, rather than just doing things that look cool and look fun. How do you actually do things that have a business impact? And then I'm going to wrap things up with a few stories that we have about how automation is already creating business value for healthcare. And then we won't have time to really drill into some key takeaways, but I've got a slide that you want to take a screenshot of and take that away with you. So in healthcare, most of us who are consumers of healthcare and not behind the scenes understanding all of the nuts and bolts that go into actually delivering healthcare here in the U.S., we think about the nurses and the doctors, the anesthesiologists, the front office people, the people sitting at the front desk who are helping you schedule, those kind of folks in healthcare. What we forget to remember is that there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes. In fact, 34% of healthcare work is something happening behind the scenes. It is finance, it is HR, scheduling, coding. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, the revenue cycle within healthcare is a very complicated process. And as you can imagine, understanding the interactions between providers who are delivering care and then your insurance company, the payers who are paying for that, whether that's private insurance provided by your employer or insurance provided through the state or federal government, the Medicaid and Medicare programs. There's a lot of administration that happens on the back end of things when after procedures are actually provided by a doctor or nurse. So there are a lot of opportunities for artificial intelligence and automation to really have a big impact right away. Some of the studies say things like 30% of work in healthcare has the potential for automation. And these mainly fall into two areas. This is from a McKinsey study a year ago. Data collection. So there's a lot of work that nurses do, that doctors do, that transcriptionists do to take information and encode it or just to document information. Doctors spend a lot of their time writing notes. I think we've all heard stories about how doctors are very frustrated with the implementation of electronic health records in some ways because they spend a lot more time, they feel like, documenting their encounters, the visits that they have with patients, than they do actually having face time with patients. And that's one of the things that automation can help to address. The other big area, of course, is data processing. And these are behind the scenes, after documentation is done, or trying to combine and connect documentation from different sources, whether that's sharing information between different facilities, all of the interoperability challenges that we have, or if it's the processing on the back end of taking procedures and coding them, taking them through the billing cycle, through revenue cycle management, all of the finance activities. Another thing that we've added over the past few years is the front end of that process through pre-authorization. So making sure that the insurance company has authorized the procedure and is going to pay for it after it's done. We don't want any surprise billing to happen to a patient because they thought a procedure was going to be approved by their insurance company and then wasn't. So there's even more data processing on the front end of procedures that we receive now to make sure everything's going to go smoothly on the back end. So these areas of data collection and data processing make up over a third of the work in healthcare that has a huge potential for automation. Now, there are other areas that, it's a little bit more challenging and takes a lot more human thought and human processing today. Things that may not be right for AI, according to the McKinsey study. Diagnostic expertise. We've seen some not successes. Some challenges with IBM Watson, IBM Watson Health. There are a lot of promise, but really very limited progress in the past decade in a lot of ways. So there are some challenges there in terms of the complexities of diagnosing patients and being able to identify all of the little things that may not show up in discrete documentation or even in notes. Physical treatment, of course, can be challenging. When we talk about robotic process automation and AI, a lot of what we're talking about today and the opportunities are digital. They have a lot less to do with interaction between robots, physical robots, and humans in a physical context. And then direct patient interaction, right? So these face-to-face conversations, not necessarily the physical part of it, but the human emotional part of it, having a connection with your nurse, a connection with your doctor. And what we're trying to do mostly through automation today is eliminate the non-human interaction parts of healthcare and try to provide more time, more capacity to clinical coworkers so that they can have more time interacting with patients and providing that human aspect of what it is to be cared for in a healthcare context. So there are some places where it may never be right, but then again, I am a little bit of a futurist, and I think that technology is moving pretty quickly, and we see some evidence where some of these might have big opportunities for automation and artificial intelligence. With imaging, we are developing a lot of new techniques for doing analysis and identifying tumors and things like that. These things are getting to a point where they can do at least as well as humans, and in an augmented sense, really helping humans make those diagnostic conclusions from imaging information. And the Da Vinci robot is not a new thing. The Da Vinci surgical robot has been around for more than a decade now and has done a lot of surgeries. So imagine as these things get more and more sophisticated, what their abilities are going to be. So I think that these futuristic ideas are not gone. It's not that these things will never happen, but that there are some other low-hanging fruit that we don't want to forget about too. And of course, telehealth with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had a huge explosion in the use of telehealth, and it turns out that both patients and doctors seem to really appreciate having this as part of their interaction together. This provides this asynchronous model of communication, provides a really great way to communicate and make that more convenient for both patients and doctors alike. So huge potential. We know that there are low-hanging fruit out there, and we know that in the future we've got technology advancing in such a way that we're really going to have the ability to do some amazing things. But there are challenges, of course, and these are some of the key challenges that healthcare faces in terms of adopting automation and AI. So one, I would say, is that sometimes people come in with a very narrow view of where automation opportunities exist. Some people come in thinking about automation as just a convenience opportunity. How do I make this process less arduous for myself? Just something really simple like task automation. And other times people come in with a perspective of how do I automate something really complex end to end. So finding that sweet spot and understanding what automation opportunities really exist can be a challenge. The inability to describe business value. There are a few different ways of looking at business value when it comes to automation and AI. One is how much labor am I eliminating? How much less work do I have to do? And therefore less work I as a healthcare organization have to pay for. So that cost savings is an important one to be thinking about. But also, if you are able to automate some processes and do them faster or do them more or do them higher quality, then there are great opportunities to de-risk losses of revenue. Right? So you've got an opportunity to improve your revenue capture as well. The third one, focusing on automating individual tasks rather than processes. And this is really a challenge around if I think about it just as an individual person, I would love to have a robot to do a task for me, to click a button for me every once in a while, or to upload a file. And it's fine. Yes, that's a great opportunity to use automation, but is it a great investment in your organization's capacity for implementing automation solutions? Maybe there are higher value opportunities. The fourth one, weak technical development skills leading to high maintenance costs. The idea of automations, it can be easy without, stop and think about it, to develop automations that are very brittle. They depend very heavily on having a screen or some underlying dependent process that always works exactly the same way. But unfortunately, with automation, the inputs and the systems that are being interacted with, they're often things that are going to change, or they're things that are out of your control. So in the healthcare context, integrating with a patient registry, with a cardiac registry, that website that you're entering information into may decide to change. And it probably does quite often change just subtly. And so you have to make sure that you're building automations and building solutions that can handle those changes without breaking every other day. And then the lack of experience with change management. One of the things that I found in a lot of projects, but especially in automation, is that the solution isn't just about building a technology and throwing it out there and installing it, and people are going to use it and it's going to be amazing and wonderful. It takes a lot of partnership between business functional leaders and technology specialists to make sure that everybody's in alignment about what the goals are and how this is going to work and what the outcome is going to be. The outcome here is that we want to change a business process. Something different is going to happen. So the business leadership has to be fully bought in and really own the work effort, and technologists have to be well aligned with that to make sure they understand what the goals are and how to achieve those. So this, especially in the area of automation and AI, this business and technology partnership has to be really strong, and there has to be an expertise in conveying that vision and conveying what the future is going to look like, and helping everybody step by step incrementally accept that and get to it. That change management aspect of this is definitely very challenging. So I'm going to hand it off to Kelly now to talk about some of her experiences and thoughts around how to make sure that your automation and AI implementations are successful.
All right, well, thanks, Paul, for that handoff. Hello, everyone, again. I'm going to change focus a little bit as I start having the conversation with you today. We're going to talk a lot about the how of automation. And so when you start thinking about how to automate and how to deploy, I really think about managing relationships within the organization, the ideation process, and what does that look like, the overall intake process of how you intake your automations from the different departments, the overarching governance and implementation of the automation. So next slide, please, Paul. All right, so we're first going to talk about the importance and purpose of governance. Before we actually even deal with governance, you have to really have a good understanding of your deployment model within your organization. And there's multiple models out there. If you look at Gartner, you look at Forrester, you can have a fully IT developed deployment model where it's very much like a traditional IT. You can have, and on the exact extreme opportunity or option is a governance or a citizen development model where you have your citizen developers developing. Once you actually figure that out, then you can go and figure out what type of software that you'd like to have that really helps and assists with that type of deployment model. So at that point, you'll have the methodology of how you're going to roll out your system and the application that supports that. The next big thing, which is extremely important, is the governance of that. And so what do I mean by governance? Governance it's the set of rules and responsibilities of each of those teams and each of those relationships in your automation deployment model. So in our governance model, we maintain ITIL processing. So what does that mean? So anybody that's out there that knows service management, ITIL is Information Technology Infrastructure Library. And it's really the processes and the rules of how to implement something within your organization, or as I like to say, install something in your organization. And so my team, they go through and they verify and they vet all new technology. We make sure that we're using the right technology for the automation at the right time, using the right tools and implementing the right team. And so what we do is we actually go through, make sure everything goes through dev, test, production. We make sure that we have appropriate change management in place. So that's really what we do when we are looking at the ITIL processing piece of governance. Additionally, as these ideas are going through ideation and they're completed with the intake, we look at the value, the overall value of doing something. So is it even worth automating it? If it's a couple $100, maybe it's low-hanging fruit. If it takes a few hours to implement, maybe. But if it takes months to implement and it's only going to save a few $1,000s, we have to really look at that and justify the means for the automation. But what it does is this process gives everyone, legal, human resources, communication, marketing, IT, the opportunity to really get comfortable with the automation. So we actually have 2 meetings. The first one is called pre-governance, where we have since we are a ministry, we have our ministry contacts, our HR, and our communications, and our organizational effectiveness folks. They get to talk to the department owners, and we'll talk a little bit about what a department owner is later. They get to talk to them and say, why are we looking at doing this? What is the impact to the people side of this automation? What is the total value across the ministry? And as we start having those conversations, we start understanding the opportunities for training, the communication opportunities, the marketing opportunities that we have before we even talk about hands-on keyboard and actually performing the automation itself. And additionally, it's allowing the organization to become more comfortable with the automation, so it helps with that cultural change as well. We also, in our governance process, we have a more technical conversation with more of the IT folks. That's the change management folks. It's our big, we invite our Epic team, our big EHR team is there, and we talk about auditing. Auditing's there, legal's there. We talk about contract management a lot of times because one of the things, as you're going through your RPA implementations or really any automation, regardless of the system, you have to think about how you're going to audit that, how you're going to ensure that the controls are in place. And again, from an IT perspective, this really gets senior leadership comfortable with the automation idea and concept. And it's more of an integration. As they learn more and more about this, they start thinking, how can I use automation on my team as well? We also talk about the IT controls as part of the auditing process. So are we performing backups? What is our disaster recovery plan if something were to happen? Why would something happen? So we start asking questions up front instead of after the fact or in design phase. So again, hands aren't even on keyboard yet. We're having these conversations up front. Very, very important to get the buy-in and make sure that culture is changing to accept and adopt automation. And really, governance, I like to say, is the soft side of change. We're not forcing them to accept. It's more of a let's collaborate and make this work. And what we're finding is people are becoming, it's one of the things that people are becoming more and more used to. Next slide, please, Paul. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about deployment models now. So the relationship with business users is extremely important when you're thinking about deploying across the organization. So we have something called the process expert on the automation team. I have process experts and I have automation engineers. Those are my two key areas of focus that I have on the automation team that I manage. So our process experts work directly with the departments and they manage the process and they teach. And since our governance process and the way that we've deployed is more of a teaching model where we teach people to use the application, we teach them about Six Sigma, lean practice management. We teach them that don't always just jump to RPA, think about other opportunities within the organization. It's about the right tools, the right time, and the right technology. And so we are constantly mentioning this as we have our conversations with our department process owners. And so my process experts manage the process and automation with those teams to make sure that we are very consistent across the board, that we're looking at not only consistency, but similarity across processing. We use things called library components, where we can, for example, when we log into Epic, we have one library that everyone uses for logging into Epic. We just upgraded our Epic implementation to the latest version, and there was a change. And so instead of automating and reconfiguring all of the 30 automations that we already have in production, we had to make one modification and then just retest with everything, which made it much more streamlined. So my process experts make sure that we're having streamlined processes across the board. They're educating and training the departments the same way. I have weekly meetings with them so everyone can hear all the concerns that are coming back through the department, and it works really, really well. If you think about this is kind of reminds me of the report management of the early 2000s, and what I mean by this is when report management systems started to occur and departments wanted to go off and create their own reports, they started doing this in droves. The issue that IT had back in the early 2000s was they weren't 100% sure that the departments, and sometimes the departments weren't sure that they were pulling the right data. And so that's why this engagement and the relationship with the business is so vitally important. We want to make sure that the consistent standards are occurring across the board in a consistent way and that they're all standardized and that we're all singing the same tune, right? So that's why it's extremely important that you have a process expert that kind of works with all the departments across your organization for that standardization to occur. I talked a little bit about deployment models, and what we have is we have department owners and process owners, and let me explain this a little bit. A department owner is someone that owns the automation process that's occurring, and this is typically at a senior level, like a director or above, or a senior manager or above process. they have people that report up to them that are going to be managing those automations within their organization. So for example, we've been working with the tax department, let's just say, and the tax department director would be the department owner. They manage the people who are going to be process owners, and they also manage the different processes that occur. We work with those department owners to talk about value and the relationship of that process. And we've also been training and educating them on what it means to automate something. So we don't just automate the current process or the as-is process. We look at that future state model. We talk about things or areas of improvement that can happen. What are those pain points that they've just been dealing with for so long? And we also talk to them about getting a process automation ready. And so we have that conversation with them. A process owner are the people who actually put hands on keyboard. So not only do they work in the department typically, they manage the process currently, or they manage people, like it could be a lead that manages the process. Process owners can be SMEs of a process itself. And what we do is we go through a very intense training and education program to make sure our process owners not only understand the technical tools, like how to use the tool, making sure that they're using library components, and we have a very hands-on integration. Remember that relationship is extremely important with our process owners to make sure that they're using standard processes. But we also educate them on lean process management, making sure that they're using the right tool, not always just jumping to RPA if that's not the answer. We have a whole tool set within our organization, and sometimes we found out that they'll come to us with all these questions, and sometimes it's an Excel report. Sometimes it's a clarity report that gets run. So we're educating them, and as they go, they're making better and better educated conversations and decisions through this process. Next slide, please. All right, so I talked a little bit about a citizen developer. A citizen developer is a business user that manages processes and automation. So very much that process owner that I just talked about. We have a lean process management methodology mindset. And what I mean by that is we look at the 5 whys, right? We go through, we could potentially do a Gemba walk with them. And so we're really using lean process methodology to reduce waste in a process. For instance, we had a 65-step process that we reduced to 21 steps prior to automating, because we found out that almost 40 or 41 steps were not even needed in the process itself. So really thinking about what is the process, what are we trying to actually implement, and what's really not needed in what we're doing. For example, in this one process, we had almost 50% of the steps were audit steps where I had to go back and check somebody else's work that had been completed. And with RPA, you do not need to do that. And then the citizen developer works directly with the automation center of excellence for governance. And we've talked about the governance model that we have, but basically once an idea goes through the intake process and we understand what the value is, those process and department owners work directly with the COE, and they have to basically, just like a project board, they would say, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're doing it, this is what we're doing, this is the how we're doing it. And they have to talk through their whole process of, we've talked to this team, we've talked to this team, we've understand that we've made modifications to the process to even make it more streamlined, and so this is how we are determining value. So it's very much a collaborative effort. Go ahead, Paul, next slide. All right, choosing how to automate. So I've talked about this before as well. So choosing between automation approaches. For example, you can use RPA, we use UiPath. And our first option is always the EHR. If we can do something in our EHR system and it's readily available, why wouldn't we do that? So we talk a lot, and we spend a lot of time working with our EHR folks. I mean, a lot of time working with our EHR folks on, is this opportunity available in the current EHR? Is it available in the next EHR deployment? Because we deploy every quarter new updates. If something's going to be available in 3 months or 6 months out, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go and spend the time to automate that. And so we put that on our roadmap. But we also make sure that we're integrating those thoughts and those ideas. So for example, we had something, we just upgraded to the latest quarterly update in Epic last month. And the Epic team, which is our EHR system, thought that this functionality for this automation was going to be available. So we gave them a week to have some breathing time. We went through and we went back and said, okay, let's reevaluate what's available in this release. We found out that 90% of it was available in the new quarterly update. So that other 10% we reevaluated and said, is this something that we should automate with RPA, or is it something that's going to be available in the next Epic release? Well, we found out that it wasn't going to be available, that 10% wasn't going to be available in the next Epic release. So we're going to spend that 10% of that time to actually use Epic and RPA. Because what we're finding is there's pieces and parts that are available with your EHR system, but some of the things where you actually have to press a button or confirm, where we could actually send a report and say, hey, this is off, or this is within the set points, and we feel comfortable just automatically approving that because that's our internal process. We're just going to auto approve those. And so having those conversations with your EHR team is extremely vital to understanding what to automate, especially after the fact when they say, yeah, this is all going to be here and it's not. So making sure that you've got those feedback loops and understanding that is extremely important. And again, best process to automate with the best technology and the best team to manage the automation. Those are the three key pieces that we focus on when choosing how to automate. Next slide, please. All right, so this is my last slide, and I'm going to hand it back over to Paul. But transparency is absolutely important. So that relationship that we have with the department, the relationship that we have with other IT teams, without it, you're not going to be successful. So the importance of transparency and involvement of all the teams is just, I can't stress this enough. If you don't have that transparency and that open conversation, for us, it just wouldn't work. So, and really, without the transparency, there is no trust. This has been a journey of, and I'll say it's a journey, it's definitely not a sprint, of changing the organizational culture. So making sure that you are transparent, make sure that teams can trust you, having those conversations. I mean, we've had conversations at 8 o'clock at night when the surgeons are available to have those conversations, or 6 o'clock in the morning, like today. So it's just very important to make sure that you're there, that you're available, and to have those conversations, to be very open about what automation is and what it isn't. What we are finding is that, very similar to what Paul's mentioned already, that when you start adding automation and other technologies like machine learning and AI, that's where you get your value. So with that, I'm going to pass it over back to Paul. Thanks so much.
That was great, Kelly. Thank you so much for sharing those insights and sharing what your experience has been like. You guys are doing absolutely incredible things. So thank you for sharing that. So given those, the work that it takes to be successful, I'm going to talk a bit about, what does success look like? Where are the places where we're seeing healthcare organizations really create value through automation and AI? So just three really quick examples. One is through the pre-authorization of procedures. So if you're able to do this authorization process more quickly, more smoothly, it reduces the labor cost on the front end, the amount of work that has to be done. It avoids unnecessary rescheduling of procedures, which of course causes delays and causes holes in the operational efficiency, utilization rates, and things like that. And then reducing claim denials, making sure that whole process is done correctly up front helps ensure that when it comes time to submit claims for payment, that they won't go awry there on the back end as well. Care management. Streamlining the care management activities themselves, whether it's data collection or through the documentation of interactions that care managers have with patients, or the research and the filing of paperwork to make sure everything gets ticked and tied through those processes. Minimizing human bias to make sure that everybody who needs the care and support, the care management support that they require, is getting it, and maximizing those profit outcomes, making sure that the purpose of a lot of care management programs is to make sure that people are getting the care they need, especially offline, outside of a traditional care setting, making sure they have the support they need at home, in the community, and then being able to reduce the occurrence of acute admissions or readmissions or use of the ER facilities. Those are all the goals of care management that can be enhanced and uplifted through automation. And financial assistance. Part of we know that healthcare is expensive, and some of the consequences of that are the fact that sometimes people can't pay for the care that they need, and this is especially true in high-cost situations like cancer care. And so through automation, we can help more people get access to the external funds that are available to help cover those high costs, whether those are programs from drug manufacturers themselves, where they're reimbursing for some of the costs of their high-end, very expensive drugs, or through foundations like Patient Assistance Network and places like that. So obviously the impacts here are great. If more people have access to those funding sources that they need, then it can reduce those impacts of financial toxicity, both the impacts to your budget, your home budget in your pocketbook, as well as the impacts to you emotionally, having that stress of additional stress of financial burden on top of the challenging healthcare burden. Optimizing those processes in the background, making them smoother, more streamlined, and then also decreasing as a consequence the bad debt that comes from that uncompensated care. So it has a bottom line impact for healthcare organizations as well as for the patients themselves. So just a few great opportunities, and they cover the gamut of healthcare functions, right? Whether it's a corporate function that's common to a lot of organizations, finance, HR, supply chain, IT, or something specific to healthcare, clinical administration, patient and administrative call centers, EHR, testing and validation. Kelly talked a lot about the tight coordination with their EHR team. There's a lot of scrutiny and work that goes into making sure that the EHR is configured correctly every time an upgrade happens or a change happens. You would not want something going wrong in the EHR configuration. Rev cycle management is a huge opportunity. On the payer side, thinking about things like underwriting and contract management is also something big, and it's something that's becoming more important across the healthcare spectrum because of value-based payment models and such. So the top performers are succeeding here. Kelly talked about these structures. I would boil it down this way, kind of four four big things that are really helpful to lift up those automations. Recruiting an engaged governance team, that's that business human relationship. Creating a really solid center of excellence. Kelly talked about her teams and what roles they have and what they do and the importance of their relationship with business folks. Focusing on implementing business improvements. Kelly talked a lot about this as well. The focus on business value. What is the outcome we're trying to drive and how is it going to help the organization? And then delivering that value incrementally, making sure that every step of the way, these are 2, 3, 4 month projects, not 18-month projects. You get value continuously throughout the whole process. So some models that you might think about, I'm going to flash through these just kind of quickly. That governance model on top of this diagram here, the rolling up to those executive sponsors, making sure everybody has visibility, the transparency that Kelly talked about, and then the underpinnings to that being the RPA Center of Excellence or the Automation Center of Excellence, making sure that you have a really solid group and processes for them and tools for them to promote use of standards, advocacy across the organization, making sure people know what the capabilities are, support for all the automations that are deployed, and then the innovation to continue paying attention to what else is coming out in your core applications, what's coming next from automation tools like UiPath, what's coming next in the ML and data science space, and how do you bring all those tools to bear to make sure that you can be really successful. And then delivering those incrementally, right? Gartner tells us that robotic process automation has gotten through its peak of inflated expectations and is climbing up the trough of disillusionment. We think that if you incrementally take steps, you can sort of, in your own organization, which often also goes through these cycles, you can incrementally deliver value every step of the way and not go through that whole cycle yourself. Other folks have already gone through the cycle. The industry has gone through the cycle. What you can do is take incremental steps, implement value with every single project that you do, and deliver value in the long term. And it gets easier and easier because you're focusing on how to make things reusable, how to use best practices to make them really strong, and how to make sure you've got the change management processes in place to actually implement them as new business capabilities, as opposed to just installing new software and throwing it out there for the masses to try to use. So hopefully this was helpful. I've got a slide here that tries to summarize a few of those key takeaways. We talk about here on the left, those tools, governance, COE, business value focus, and the incremental and scalable aspect of things, and those 5 challenges, the narrow view of where can automation be helpful, how do you articulate and describe value to different stakeholders, how do you think about automating tasks versus whole processes, and where do you create the most value you can through that? Making sure that implementations are not technically weak, and then making sure you also have the culture, the mindset, the expectation that this is a change management process as well. So we won't go through all this slide in detail, but take this one as a takeaway and think about these things as you're going on your own journey to implement automation and AI and advance your organization by creating business value that way. So thanks, everyone. We're off to questions next, and I hope that you've gotten something great out of our talk today.
So again, automation first, transformation in healthcare. This is Paul Boal, Vice President of Innovation, Amitech Solutions, and Kelly Wibbenmeyer, PhD, Director of Performance Consulting and Business Solutions at Mercy. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm Dave Castanero, Technical Director of Prepare.ai. Let's have a little chat about healthcare automation. So, Paul, a question came in during the session saying, are there any specific RPA tools that you recommend in healthcare domain? I'm familiar with UiPath. You had a few comments on that. Do you want to recap some of those?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Dave. It's interesting when this automation space, like with a lot of technologies, there are a couple different kinds of solutions. On the one hand, you've got technology platforms like UiPath, ones that are built around really being a development tool and a platform for execution of automation and all of the widgets that you need to pull all the work together. And I think those are really great, very well-built, all-purpose kind of multi-tools. And then in healthcare, and I think in a lot of other domains too, you start seeing people come out with very specific targeted solutions. Like in healthcare, one big area for automation is revenue cycle management. And so there are a number of different vendors out there who are specifically targeting healthcare revenue cycle management. And those processes of the coding and billing and reconciliation on the back end, all managing all the money behind healthcare. So you kind of have to look at that and take almost a build versus buy, or a platform versus specific purpose built kind of tool. And the things that you need to consider are what is your appetite as an organization for developing things and building a capability versus taking an off-the-shelf solution and taking it for what it is. A lot of conversations there that we always have with folks about black box. Do you have visibility into how it works, why it's doing what it's doing, the ability to fix things when they break and stuff like that. So definitely something, there are a lot of options out there, and definitely something you have to consider for each specific organization.
Great, thanks. Kelly, question for you. When you set up the systems in a hospital, do you have a HIPAA compliant system separate from kind of run-of-the-mill other system? Or are they all together and do they all share the same data privacy and data control requirements?
Yeah, and so with that, the answer really is it depends, right? So it depends on what you're trying to implement. So for example, we've been live with RPA for, goodness, just about a year now at Mercy. And it really depends on the system that you're working in. So when you utilize RPA, it's within the system that you're already in. So for example, we are an Epic shop, which has HIPAA compliant information in it. Many of the processes that we're automating are not subject to the HIPAA laws, but you're still within that software, that system. So you still have to be cognizant of that as you're going through. The biggest piece or aspect of this is making sure that you have governance, regardless if it's HIPAA compliant or not, right? So every organization has ITIL processes within IT, right? So you're looking at ITSM, you're making sure that you're working through your appropriate change management processes, that you're working through your applicable IT systems analysis. We have to make sure that we're going through security reviews and things of that nature. So, making sure that you're still adhering to your organizational standards is very important as you're looking at how to deploy within your organization.
Great. So another question, and again, I think this was mentioned during the Q&A offline in the original session, but how will human staff need to adapt or adjust to work best with AI tools, with robots or devices? And so a supplemental question on that is, will staff need new trainings, or is this kind of just an incremental evolution of trainings and adaptation that staff is already used to?
Yeah, so I can take that one, Paul, if you'd like.
Yeah,
so
go ahead, Kelly.
We've actually gone through extensive training. So regardless of tool agnostic, you're going to have to go through some change, right? So developing an automation strategy, Dave, as you're well aware, is very challenging for an organization, or it can be challenging for an organization. So you have to be able to gauge your organization, look at the culture. Are they accepting change? Are they reluctant to change? And as you start having these conversations, you look at what change has to occur based on what you're doing. There are multiple RPA technologies out in the market right now. And depending on how you're going to deploy and utilize it within your organization is really going to depend on that change strategy or how you're going to educate folks within your organization. We opted for UiPath at Mercy. And we've actually implemented, as I mentioned in the presentation, a citizen development model. And yes, there was lots of conversations and education, and it wasn't only education of the people who it was directly impacting, but there's education to the folks that it's indirectly impacting as well. And so as you think about modeling, your change and your implementation strategy, you have to think of more of not just installation, but implementation. So as you think of installing something like an IT system within your organization, you're thinking about all the testing and the implementation aspects, making sure you have the right hardware, making sure you have the right software. But then when you think about the implementation, it's about the people aspect of that. And so we spend a lot of time on that people aspect, and we work with our organizational development, making sure that we've got the right ministry fit because we are a Catholic organization, making sure that we've got the right value, even before we put hands on keyboard. We don't want to implement something that doesn't have the value, right? So if you're only going to save a couple $1,000s and it costs $10,000 to implement, why would we implement something like that? So really making sure that you're thoughtful with what you're implementing. So yes, lots and lots of training the organization. Paul, you have anything else to add?
Just one quick thing to add as an analogy, it's kind of, maybe it's a trivial analogy, but the transition from, say, a typewriter to a word processor and computer, right? You have to learn that this new tool is not just a replacement for the way you do things today, but hey, it's got other capabilities too, and it kind of introduces a new way of thinking. And it takes time to learn and adapt and think, oh, hey, now I've got this automation tool that can help me change the way I do process XYZ. Or when I have a new process to implement, I can think automation first, and maybe I can use this tool to do something that in the past I would have, hired a small team of people to do instead. So that mental shift is really important, and what Kelly said about change management and the education and continuous communication is absolutely key to making that successful.
Well, those are great points. That I'm curious, when you guys say that, are there departments or use cases or types of doctors or types of tasks, types of nurses or staff that are more amenable to this by some like intrinsic nature of the task that they do? They're like, oh yes, I'm going to grab onto this automation stuff real quick. Or are there other trouble cases? Like if you were advising a hospital system trying to get started with automation, where might you start? Which department?
You got a smile, Kelly. You want to start?
Well, there's lots of opportunities in the revenue, as Paul mentioned, and the revenue management. That's really where we started within the organization. But a lot of folks in revenue do not have the skills required to be good citizen developers. So it's important that as you're going through and you're looking at this journey, because that's exactly what it is. It's a journey that you're picking the right people with the right skills that they want to do this work, right? So just picking somebody because they're really good at the process aspect of it isn't the best fit necessarily. They have to be able to be very forward thinking. They have to be okay with changing things. I mean, gosh, like I said, we've been at this for a year, and I think we've changed our education I think we're on round 3 or 4 right now of educating, because we're constantly getting feedback in that feedback loop, right? And so we're trying to make things better as we go. So someone that is very, very quick to adapt and quick to change, I think, is extremely important in the role. Anything else to add, Paul?
I would just add the incentive too. What is this person's incentive to change? When you're looking at folks who have more of a clinical role or are involved in patient operations, kind of closer to touching patients, they've got an incentive to want to automate those things that they can get off their plate, whether it's some aspect of documentation or doing some clerical work in the background, all of those kind of things. They've got a big incentive to get that off their plate so they can spend more time face-to-face with patients as well. So what's the incentive, right? Why are you doing it, and how's it going to benefit is a big part of it.
Great, that's awesome. Again, this is Paul and Kelly talking about automation in healthcare. Thanks so much for joining us. I think we're out of time now, so we'll have to cut it there. But thanks so much, and see you all later.
Thank you all. Thanks, Dave, for the
opportunity. Thanks. All right. Bye-bye.